So let me introduce our guest. Brad Aronson, to my right, founded iFrontier, a digital ad agency back in the early days of the internet. He later sold it to a company that sold to Microsoft. Now he's an investor in tech startups and is a passionate mentor and board president of Big Brothers Big Sisters Independence Region and HopeWorks, a tech training and job placement agency in Camden, both of which are incredible organizations. In 2019, he published Humankind, a moving compendium of acts of kindness from all over the world, many here in Philadelphia, big and small, that have helped to change the lives of so many people, and in the process really helped to change the world. Dr. Vera Ludwig is a cognitive neuroscientist and a research associate at Pratt Labs in the Department of Neuroscience at Penn Medicine, which is a multidisciplinary research group that uses science as a way to improve health and well-being and build a better society. Dr. Ludwig is also a practitioner and teacher of mindfulness and yoga, and uses that training to inform her research into how our minds and bodies react to our emotions and can affect our emotions. Before we start our conversation with them, I'm going to have Brad lead us in a quick exercise that lightly illustrates the link between happiness and kindness, something Vera will talk about a little bit later. Brad, I'm going to pass it to you.
All right, thank you. And thanks for that introduction and having me on the show. I want to start by asking all of you to think of someone who did something nice for you recently, or perhaps a while ago. Maybe they did something small like checking in or dropping off a meal, or something much bigger. So let's just take 10, 15 seconds and think about that. All right, so I know this next part is dangerous to do at the beginning of a presentation, at the beginning of our conversation. But I'd like everyone to take out your cell phone and pull up a text message or an email, or on your whatever device you're using, and send that person a note letting them know that you're thankful they're in your life. Like, I'm happy you're in my life, I appreciate you. And we're only going to do this for 20, 25 seconds, so it has to be a short note, if you don't mind. This is the time when my wife gets an email and says, oh, Brad must be doing another presentation. What's I love about this is that in under 3 minutes, each of us has made someone's day. And if you're like most people, you probably feel great about it. And here's what's going on. So being kind makes us feel good. And when we think about the kindness someone did for us, we relive that kindness. So when I do this in audiences and I can see people's faces, and I say, think about something nice that someone did for you, everyone is smiling. Like, reliving that experience makes us happy. And there's also a lot of research that being grateful makes us feel good. You know, for example, it's commonly known that if you keep a gratitude journal and write 3 things you're grateful for every day, you're going to be happier than you'd otherwise be, because you're seeing the positive around you. You're looking for things to write about. And in this case, you're finding the positive and sharing it. And so you're also doing a kind act. And what's so awesome is we could do this every day. Like, what if every morning after we had breakfast, or every night after dinner, we sent someone a note letting them know we appreciated them? And what if we took 15 minutes and sent a handwritten note that someone would hold on to forever? It's a pretty great way to start or end the day, and hopefully also a great way to start this conversation.
So actually, I'm inclined to say maybe we should just spend this hour sending notes to people who were kind to us and getting notes back, because that's also really nice. But okay, let's not do that. Thank you for that. With that note, with probably everybody in their homes smiling, Brad, let me ask you a little bit about your book, Humankind, which, by the way, had me weeping on basically every other page, mostly because I'm a little bit of a sap these days, but also because it is really moving to read sort of story after story of people just doing kind acts for other people. Tell me what led you to write it.
So I had 2 inspirations for the book. The first was the high school graduation of a mentee of mine. She went to Girard College, which, as most Philadelphians know, is a high school, even though it's called Girard College. And at her graduation, on my left-hand side was a 70-something-year-old man who told me he came down from New York for graduation, and he came down every single year because Girard changed his life and he wanted to support all the new graduates. And there's a point in the ceremony where they sang the school song, and this guy stood up and belted it out so proudly. On the other side of me was a woman, and she was crying. And she said she thought maybe her daughter would be in jail or dead, and here she was graduating. It's just a beautiful moment. And then the commencement speaker gets up and he talks about how this is magical. The students at Girard are from areas of Philadelphia where it's expected a large number of them will drop out of high school, and very few of them will get into college. Yet every single graduating senior had been accepted to college. And he went on to say that the seniors were inheriting such a negative world that we wouldn't see this in the media, because so often the positive news stories are missed. So of course, the next day, I look in every news outlet, I get the Inquirer, I'm looking online, and there's nothing about Girard. And I was so disappointed. Like, I had a front row seat to an inspiring movie that brought me to tears, and no one could share in that positivity. And boy, do we need that positivity. And as I thought about it, I decided that if I wanted these stories out there, I should start writing them and putting them out there. So that was the first inspiration. The second inspiration came about 6 months later. So my wife, Mia, had a swollen lymph node and went to the doctor, and she was diagnosed with leukemia. And she needed to go through 2.5 years of treatment. And just so you know, she is through treatment, she's in remission. We are so lucky and grateful. Of course, at the time, we were completely panicked and did not know what was going to happen. And partway through her treatment, the nurses suggested that we go to a conference for young cancer givers and their caregivers. And we didn't want to, because basically you're at the hospital 3 days a week dealing with cancer. The idea of a weekend conference about it is less than thrilling. Right. But the nurse, anyone who has a health crisis knows the nurses are amazing, and they're why we got through it. So we went. And one of the speakers there said, if you have 2.5 years of treatment ahead of you, you need a project. A project gives you a purpose, a distraction, and something to do during the hours you're there. So that night at dinner, we're talking about projects. Our son Jack is 5 at the time. He doesn't really know what's going on, but he knows that we're doing projects. Mia decides that she'll draw a picture or write a few lines in a journal every night. Jack, who is a diehard Phillies fan, decides he will play 200 days of wiffle ball in a row. And I mean, he every day, we were the US Postal Service of wiffle ball, no matter the weather. Like, his hat, he has a Phillies necklace, Philly jersey, wristband, everything. It was the best season the Phillies ever had. They won 200 games in a row. I don't know that we'll see that happen again. But my project was writing about the kind deeds that changed our lives. I'd always been a helper. I'd always been a volunteer. And this is the first time I needed help. And I was awful at accepting help. But luckily, people stepped up and changed our lives. And I wrote about that. And similar to the exercise, it changed my complete perception. Like, at first, we go to all these doctor meetings and hear, you're so young to have cancer and you're so healthy. This is very unusual. And you start thinking, like, why me? Why does my wife have to go through this? Why does our son, who has an amazing mom, have to have her less engaged for 2.5 years? But as I wrote about all these kind acts, I realized we were so lucky to have these people in our lives. And don't get me wrong, I would have gladly changed and not been in that position, but it did shift my mindset. And that helped us get through this. And then I went on to want to keep writing, and I started writing about seemingly trivial acts of kindness that transform a life or have a ripple effect, changing thousands of lives. And that's the majority of the book.
So tell me about a couple of those. I mean, tell us about a couple of your favorite examples of acts of kindness from the book.
I love them all, but I'll start with the story about Jimmy. So Jimmy grew up in Flint, Michigan. And when he was 3 years old, all he wanted to do was not be noticed. But it was really hard for him not to be noticed. For one thing, his parents tied his shoelaces in a huge jumble of knots when he went to school. And he was the only kid in the 3rd grade coming to school with his shoelaces in this huge jumble of knots. But he was also the only kid who couldn't tie his shoes. And his teacher, Mr. Clarkson, said he would be happy to tie Jim's shoes, but Jimmy was horrified. Like, that would be more embarrassing than anything. And there was a reason why Jimmy couldn't tie his shoes. There was one thing that made him really different than all the other kids. He was missing one of his hands. And it was tough for him. His classmates would sometimes tease him and call him Captain Hook. One of his classmates cried on the first day of third grade because she found his prosthetic hand so terrifying. So naturally, he wants to fly under the radar. One day he gets to school and Mr. Clarkson's standing outside of the classroom. He says, "Jimmy, I figured it out." And Jimmy says, "What did you figure out, Mr. Clarkson?" He says, "I'll show you." And he turns off the light in the classroom, turns on a movie to occupy the class, drags 2 chairs into the hall, and teaches Jimmy how to tie his shoes with one hand. Decades later, Jim said that was a defining moment in his life, that it's when he learned that he could do anything other kids can do, and it was okay to do it differently. And he said he didn't know if it took Mr. Clarkson 20 minutes or hours to learn, and it didn't matter. It taught him that he could get what he wanted to get. And he wanted to play baseball, so he would practice baseball all the time. Well, he wound up leading our Olympic team to a gold medal as our pitcher. And when you pitch with one hand, so you're starting, you have your glove under your armpit, you pitch, get your glove, field, he did great. And of course, this is Jim Abbott, who went on to play professional baseball. And he said when he was playing pro ball, all these parents and kids would show up at his games. And it was parents of children with disabilities. And they were looking for inspiration. They were looking for encouragement. And he said he talked to every one of them. And he said he would get hundreds of letters a week. And he and someone that worked for the baseball team answered every single letter. And he would go and give talks to inspire these kids and to raise money. And he said it was because of the difference Don Clarkson made in his life. He wanted to give back. Well, one of those kids was Nick Newell. When Nick was 6 years old, his grandparents took him to a Yankee game. And then he got to go to a meet and greet and meet Jim Abbott. And Nick said, that was the first time in my whole life I ever met anyone else who had only one hand. And here I am, and there's this guy who pitches for my favorite baseball team. He has one hand and he tells me I could do whatever I want to do. And I knew I could do it. And Nick always wanted to be a wrestler. So in high school, he started wrestling. He lost his first 17 matches by getting pinned, which of course is the worst way to lose a wrestling match. But by senior year, he was an all-state wrestler. He had school records, he had state records. He went on to captain his college wrestling team. And then he started competing in mixed martial arts. And he lost his first mixed martial arts match, but then won his next 13. And he wanted to compete in the UFC, which is the highest paying and most well-known league. And Dana White, who ran it, said, it's hard enough to fight with 2 hands. I'd be crazy to let someone fight with 1 hand. So Nick joined a different league and became a world champion. And he told me, he said, as he became better known, parents started seeking him out, looking for advice on how to inspire their kids. And he said he met with every single parent. And he goes to events regularly for kids who are missing part or all of an upper limb with the goal of inspiring them. And he says he talks to everyone. And I asked him, like, what drives you to do this? And he said, when I was 6 years old, Jim Abbott met with me. He taught me that I'm not too important, that I should meet with anyone who needs encouragement. I said, Nick, what do you tell these kids? He said, I tell them they could do whatever they want to do. And sometimes I even teach them to tie their shoes with 1 hand.
Wow.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, because it's like a triple story. Because 3 acts of kindness from the one teacher. That's beautiful.
And what's so neat in these stories is that so often the person that does the act of kindness has no idea.
Yeah.
Because at the time you're just doing something for someone. Mr. Clarkson noticed that Jim needed his shoes tied. He didn't realize that thousands and thousands of kids' lives would be changed.
So, Vera, one of the things that I was struck by in reading Brad's book, it's not just that it makes you feel good about humanity, which it does, But there's also a real sense of joy in the book, and partly that I think is Brad, who clearly is brings joy to situations he's in, but that is also because there's a sense that people are happier for these good deeds that they are doing for others. So I wanted to bring you here to talk to us a little bit about what the research says about the link between kindness and happiness. Brad touched on this a little bit earlier.
Sure.
What do we know?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on this event. It's really touching. Thanks for these amazing stories, Brad. It reminds me of some teachers that I had that also had a huge impact on my life, and it was really just a small thing that they did, and it changed my entire life, basically. So yeah, I think this is such an important topic. And so the science shows that indeed, like doing kind acts actually makes people happy. So there's a lot of studies actually now where people are really asked to do acts of kindness to others, and it's compared with other conditions, for example, doing something nice for yourself. And actually you see that people's moods improve, even their blood pressure is often lower, and yeah, the life satisfaction increases, etc. So it has been shown now many times that it has an effect on happiness. And that might be a bit counterintuitive, like maybe we think, oh, we are like if you feel bad, then do something for yourself, right? Take a bath or something like this. But actually it might be much better, and the research shows it makes you actually happier if in that moment you choose to help someone else.
And so, and this research is like, how do you measure it? Like, how do you know?
So with happiness and well-being, usually you have to ask people, right? Because we can, of course, also measure the brain and the response of the body, and people have also done that. But with happiness, yeah, how do you really know if someone is happy? You basically ask them. So there's a lot of validated questionnaires that you can give people, for example, about how many positive emotions they experience in everyday life, or how many negative emotions, or how strong these emotions are. This is one aspect of happiness. But also overall life satisfaction. So you can ask them questions about like, so you would just get an item like, overall, I'm very satisfied with my life, or I wouldn't do anything differently if I lived it again. And then you just rate that. And then that's basically a quantitative measurement of how people feel. But also what we can do is that we look inside the brain, basically. And we can use functional magnetic resonance imaging, for example, where we can get an idea of the blood flow, and we infer where the neural activation takes place in the brain. And we find that when people give to others, there's regions of the brain that are related with reward processing that really activate. So those are regions that also activate when I eat something sweet, or when I see something sweet, or and they also activate
When you do something kind for somebody.
In a simplified story.
Fascinating. And how long has this kind of research been going on?
I don't know when the first studies were done with this. Maybe Brad knows more when it started, but I mean, I know there was a big study on this, like around 2006, looking at the neuroscience.
Mm-hmm. Because brain science is, I mean, what we know about the brain is, I mean, we don't know that much relative to the brain, right? That research is all relatively new. But actually, what's kind of interesting, what's interesting to me is, and you and I talked about this earlier, that you started out as a neuroscientist, right? And then you spent some years training as a yoga and meditation teacher, which now informs your work as a scientist.
Yeah.
So can you explain that link, and sort of what was the intention of that, and sort of what have you seen?
Yeah, so basically I started out in science, and I was really just looking for evidence and for science and for the facts. And I was doing my PhD, which was also related to well-being, self-regulation, etc. But I was missing something. I had the feeling, there's something Like we are studying certain interventions, there are certain exercises, and see how they influence people. But are they really good? Are they really strong enough? Is there not even more? Because scientists were often sitting in our offices and we're reading and reading and reading and thinking and thinking and thinking. And so I had this urge to explore the world a little more and see what is out there. And so I came to yoga, and so really not just yoga in the sense of stretching or something like we often know it in the West here, but there's so much more to yoga. Like of your philosophy of yoga, it's basically about how we can achieve a state of oneness with the world, like experiencing everything as one. There's so much to it, and so I discovered like this world a little bit. And when I tried out the techniques that we were taught there, like meditation techniques, etc., it was so amazing. I was like, whoa, no one taught me this in school. Like I can be so incredibly happy. I have never even believed this could happen. With certain meditations, I can give one example. Is there's yoga of beauty also, that maybe not so many people know, which has to do with meditating with art. And so basically you can sit in front of a piece of art and really take it in, and you have wonderful, beautiful experiences and really get into the moment. Yeah, and then how I got back then was again the opposite, that I felt, okay, now I'm in those circles and there are a lot of claims being made that people say, okay, you have to do this and you have to do that, and dogma and etc. that I also encountered. And I was like, okay, now I really need science again, because I don't know if all of this works. Maybe some of the things even are not good for people, etc. So I thought, okay, now let's get back to science and let's see which of these methods really work and really help people. So that's kind of where I am now. Back, I mean, I always did both in parallel, but now I'm more back into the scientific world, I would say.
So one of the things that you do is similar to what this exercise that Brad was talking about, with connecting with other people, right? You said that in the lab you have people, and you got this sort of from your yoga training too, right? This sort of I don't know what you call it. It's sort of intentional connecting with people.
Right. So now in Michael Platt's lab at University of Pennsylvania, we basically have people come into the lab, or we did that before the pandemic. So people are basically wired up with different measurements. So we have their heart rates, their brain waves, their eyes, pupil size, etc. And we have them interact with each other. For example, talk about personal topics, and we see what happens in the body and in the brain when they get closer to each other and when they feel connected. And exactly, so my aim is, which was a bit disrupted by the pandemic now, but to exactly test some of the techniques that I have encountered in this yoga world or spiritual world, where, for example, people are just simply looking into each other's eyes, breathing together, something very simple. Or there are some exercises from nonviolent communication, etc., that I also encountered in the last years, where you basically just look at another person and you think about that this person also has needs and wishes and desires. It's like really simple exercises in a way that in my experience are really powerful, and I want to know now what really happens in the body and in the brain when we do those things.
So so I mean, I think that's fascinating that it can be it's simple, and that sort of actually speaks, Brad, to a lot of the stories in your book, right? Which is that many of them are incredibly simple acts. I mean, teaching a child how to tie his shoe is not something that you necessarily would write about, except that you did. But it's like these are very simple acts. And you mentioned when we started that you had all these people helping you, but in fact, you yourself have been a mentor, you said, since middle school, right? Like this is the type of, and so you sort of have a lifetime of doing for other people. Tell me a little bit about that journey and sort of how you have found it help your outlook on life.
So, I mean, I love it. I was fortunate that in middle school, at some point, my mom said to me and my brother, you guys need to go out and learn like how good life is for you. You choose somewhere and you have to volunteer. And I chose a buddies program where basically I hung out with kids who had been through like difficult time in their family. These were elementary school kids, and just played tag with them and kickball. And I could just see how unfair things were. And I really got a lot of joy out of it. Like I just liked being with these kids, and it gives you a purpose, and you learn so much from it. And something I also saw with a lot of people I spoke with for the book was that when you're with someone else and you're kind of helping them, you're not thinking about yourself. You can't think about yourself. So you're in a different mindset. And I think that's great. It's almost like meditating. Your mind is clear, except what you're doing with these folks. But so for me, I love it. And I feel that, maybe I get more out of it than the young people I've been lucky enough to mentor. Like we have extra family members who we've known, for years, like some kids for 20 years at this point. And it makes you appreciate what you have. It makes you learn so much about other people as well, who are different. And it is just unfair, right? Some people are just born into circumstances where they might not have a mentor in their life. And that's why I love Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Like every kid has so much potential, and it's not hard. I remember talking to my mom and convincing her to become a big sister. She's like, well, I'm kind of old. What are they going to get from me? And I don't know what young people like. People just need someone who's going to cheer them on, who's going to listen to them and say, you did a good job. I'm proud of you. So I think there's room for all of us to be mentors. And personally, I just find it incredibly enjoyable and rewarding and fun.
How many people do you think you've mentored at this point in your life?
Well, I have no idea. So I've been teaching for 15 years now, at least a couple days a week. So if I look at my students as well, I mean, it could be in the hundreds. And they're all mentoring me as well. I say, like, it's my learning. I learned so much from them. It's made me a better parent and a better person.
I was just thinking, if I can chime in, like there's really like a connection between what you just said and yoga, I would say, and all this mindfulness and spirituality, or how you want to call it. So basically this aspect that you forget about yourself a little bit when you give, right? And when you're really there for someone else and you really help someone or also listen or something. Because in a lot of these traditions, it's always the kind of the goal is often this transcending the ego, right? Well, how they call it often, like this, like they say that we have this identity that we have built up, that we are a certain person. And I'm a researcher, I'm Vera, etc. So and so old. And then this idea that there's something more than that, like, and that we can discover that, and that it's actually, it doesn't mean that we have to give up on this identity, but that there is a sense of connection with everything that is, and that we can, discover that. And I think by helping others and by giving to others, by being selfless, like the term says, that is another method of actually getting there. And there's actually a karma yoga, it's called, which is a little bit in that direction, where you do good things, or where you kind of give things to the greater good. You act, you try to forget about yourself, and you just act, and you get into this selfless state. So I think that's an interesting connection here.
It is, and actually one of the things, and Brad, you talked about how you come out of yourself, right? But it's not necessarily Pollyanna-ish, right? Because you are also seeing other people's real experiences, which are sometimes can be heartbreaking. I mean, if you get involved in somebody's life, right, you're seeing the good and the bad, and even relationships can be fraught. And one of the things about mindfulness, I know, is that it isn't about just focusing on the good, right? The thing about being mindful and being present is really feeling all of it, right? So you feel the joy, but you also feel whatever it is, anxiety or fear or anger that you also have going on, right? And I think what you had said to me was, you can't achieve happiness, and we're going to sort of talk about what that means even, you can't achieve happiness unless you also are able to feel all these other things.
I would
Right?
say, yeah. Yeah, like mindfulness is really about accepting what is, right? And accepting, by the way, it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to embrace, that I have to say it's great what I'm feeling right now. That's not necessarily what accepting means. Accepting is more about seeing it and acknowledging it's there. And then you don't necessarily even have to do something with it, but to see, okay, there's anger, there's sadness about this, yeah, how unfair the world it is, for example, right? Some people don't have mentors, some people, those kind of things, and that we see that, and that seeing that is often also the first step that we can now make a change, right? Because if we only walk around and only focus on feeling joyful, then we might miss those kind of things. So I think it's absolutely a very important part here.
So I want to bring up we have a few people who would like to ask you some questions. And while Shadman is, and if anybody else wants to ask a question, please drop your question into the Q&A here. While we're bringing somebody up, I will ask one of the questions from an anonymous attendee who presumably doesn't want to come up here, which is, Brad, how did you learn about the stories for your book?
So a bunch of different ways. One thing that's great to know is that these stories are everywhere. So people will say, these are amazing stories. Like, how do you find them? All I did was I started asking everyone I knew and everyone I met with, has there been some small act that changed your life? Or do you know of someone whose entire life was changed by something that seemed really small? And what I was shocked by is, I'd find out, for example, I was picking pumpkins with a friend's family that I've known this kid since high school. And I asked his wife and she's like, oh, well, Alex runs every Saturday with this doctor who has Alzheimer's, and it's amazing and beautiful. Like, Alex is one of my best friends. I was like, Alex, how come you never told me? He's like, well, no one ever asked. It's just kind of what I do. And that's like so many of these stories, they're out there everywhere. But if we don't ask, we don't hear about them. Like, the world is really an incredible place.
That's great. So just people telling you a story and then leading you to another story.
Right. And then also I read a lot. And so, for example, Jim Abbott's autobiography, Imperfect, was incredible. And there was maybe 2 pages in it where it mentioned Don Clarkson. And to me, that was the story. Like, I love that he played baseball and did all this stuff, but oh my goodness. So I go online and I find Don Clarkson's wife, and then I call her up on the phone and I talk to her, and then I find Nick Newell. So it's like I would take away little pieces that I love from books I read and then just try to take it further as well. And when you blog about good news, random people email you stories as well. So a lot of stories came in because someone read something and said, you have to know about this also.
Yeah, that's great. So, okay, we have a couple people here with us. Priscilla Rosenwald. Can we, I'd love to hear what, if you have a question. I think you have a question, right?
I did, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. I want to know how you think we can.
Priscilla, did you want to turn on your video or no?
No, it's not necessary.
Oh, okay, all right, totally fine.
Thank you, though.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I want to know how we can, there's an opportunity to mentor younger people, but how do we get younger people? And I'm talking about pre-adolescents, adolescents, to have the experience of providing acts of kindness in their world. How do we generate that? How do we create that? And I agree the impact that it has, but how do we create that culture in communities and schools?
You want to?
I can go, or Vera, I don't know if you have, I have lots of ideas on this, but I don't know the science.
Oh, good.
You want to start? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think the way to engage is to do it, right? So everyone tells their kids and tells kids like, this is really important, but kids learn by seeing what's done. And I think, for example, the Random Acts of Kindness Foundation has a free curriculum that any classroom teacher can download and find great ways to integrate this in proven ways into their classrooms. And I know at our son's school, like, his projects are pick out a problem in the community and figure out what you're going to do about it. And it gets the kids really thinking about it. And then he's coming home and he's saying, all right, what are you doing, dad and mom? And
Right.
pushing us. So I think we have to engage them in it, actively doing it, and ask their opinions. Don't tell them. Like, they're going to be passionate about something and it may not be what we're passionate about. Like, I love mentoring. My son might not be interested. He's really interested in social justice and you know, I am as well, but like, he has specific areas there that he's focused on. And I'm just going to kind of try to push that forward.
I just
Right.
remember on one of the positive psychology conferences where I was, they just gave little tokens to everyone with different like positive psychology interventions, and you could, for example, have this act of kindness, and then your task was to do what the symbol said, basically. So I wouldn't know why this wouldn't work with children, right? If it's like integrated in a game, kind of, right? To say, yeah, just like simply do something nice. It can be something super small. Research also shows it doesn't have to be something big. It can be something really, really small.
So each of the little tabs had like a different act of kindness that you could do, or is it different? It was a different thing you could do that was sort of in the realm of positive psychology.
I think if I remember correctly, they had really different things on there, and it just said act of kindness in this case. But I think you could maybe also have specific things there, right?
Yeah.
You could say something like, I don't know, bring someone some food, or I don't know, give someone a compliment,
right,
that you really truly feel. And
yeah, turn it into a game. I like that. Thanks, Priscilla. Judith Stetton, did you have a question too?
I did. Thank you. Hold on, I'm going to
Hi
take
there. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Oh,
No, just see me right now. All right. Right now. Thank you so much for this show. It's reminding me of one of the tools that I can use. I believe in kindness. I believe in being kind. I have found over the years that if I'm feeling low or depressed, that if I can find a way to help somebody else in some small way, can be something very small, that helps me get out of my depression. It actually starts in energy. So I am very supportive of this. But my question is, sometimes I feel being kind to someone else almost feels like a betrayal of my personal values. And I don't know if that's understandable or not. And like, I want to say something kind to someone, but I feel like sometimes it might be,
I think I know what you mean.
you know what I mean? That the silence, like
maybe is it something about you don't, maybe there's a moment where you actually don't feel it would be good to do that particular kind,
exactly.
and then
almost cause harm to be kind. Being kind in the present could actually be harmful in the long run.
I think I know what you mean.
Kindness sort of becomes being honest and being, not being sweet, not being, I don't know if I'm explaining it well.
I think it's important to listen to our intuition in those situations. Like, I think kindness should come, like, that's what I personally would say, should come from the heart, that we feel this impulse of wanting to help and give something, rather than maybe doing something because we think we should. I mean, we can do that too sometimes, and it's also important, but I think it's more sustainable if we, well, that can be debated for sure. But if we really feel into it, where do I want to help? Do I think that this is really going to help that person, or am I just doing it now because I want to look like I'm someone who's a good person, for example, or because I'll get something back, or you know what I mean?
It just feels like sometimes, like, if we don't speak up, sometimes if we're just kind, then it's saying that we're, that silence equals death kind of thing.
I mean, not just always being friendly, right? And
or be supportive all the time. But again, acknowledging there are hundreds of ways to be kind every day that don't involve this dilemma.
So Judith, I think I would say, being kind doesn't mean lying in my mind. So like, if there's something, that you can share with someone, like a compliment, because you feel great about it, like that's being kind. And you have to gauge it based on your relationship. But if someone like needs to hear something that they don't want to hear, that can also be a gift as well. Like, I've gotten feedback that I really didn't enjoy hearing, but it was such a gift that a friend would step up and tell me that. So that was actually being kind to me. And it depends, I think, on the situation, which is what Vera was saying.
So, thanks, Judith, for that question. Because one of the things that we're making the link between kindness and happiness here, but I think one of the things that and Vera, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, is there's also kindness to self, right? And so somebody asked a question to Brad of whether you think there is such a thing as being too kind. And I don't know if this is the same thing, but there is something about also having to take care of yourself, right? So if you are only giving to other people and not taking care of yourself,
True.
that does not seem like a path to happiness.
Yeah, that should totally be emphasized too. Yeah, I also gave a lot of workshops on like self-compassion or healthy self-love, etc. And research also shows that basically we are also nicer to other people, or we do more kind acts if we are happy ourselves. So of course, we also have to take care of ourselves. So with my example before, it was actually an actual study that showed that it made people happier to give than to give to them, or to do acts to themselves. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do that, of course. I think it's extremely important, especially now during the pandemic, etc. Maybe if people are living alone or something like this, or even also if they live with others, to be good to themselves and treat themselves like a good friend too.
So let me ask you a little bit about, we talked a lot about happiness, but like, what is happiness, right? Like, how do you define it?
Yeah, so there's so many different definitions there, of course, and has been big debates about that. In a more narrow sense, you could say it's just feeling happy, joyful in the moment. But usually it's more used in a broader sense now, and people, like scientists, often rather use the term subjective well-being, which would encompass these aspects, often that they say that it's having many positive emotions and not so many negative emotions. So the balance is more to the positive, and the life satisfaction, that I'm overall satisfied with my life. And then we have, of course, also these models like Martin Seligman's PERMA model of flourishing, where he defines different aspects of a good life. So positive emotions are just one aspect of that, but also having flow experiences, having good relationships, having meaning, and having accomplishments also. So, yeah.
And so, what are, and I'd love to hear from the audience too, if you have, first of all, examples of acts of kindness that you've seen people do or do for you. Maybe Brad will write about it, or that you yourself have done, right? That have sort of made you feel a certain way, right? But one of the things I wonder is, what are other things that we should be doing to sort of achieve these sort of like high amount of positive emotion, right? Because part of what you do is help train people on how you get there. So you don't have to be born happy, right? You can learn how to do that.
Extent, yeah. I mean, there's a certain baseline and there's a genetic component to it, but there's definitely also component where you can through activities and also the changing circumstances have an influence on that. And like I said, what I saw in this yoga and self-development world, there are many methods that can definitely increase positive emotions and states. And there just a meta-analysis just came out looking at like which interventions are best to increase subjective well-being. And actually they found that mindfulness was basically the strongest in that review, also followed by positive psychology interventions having multiple components, including perhaps also something like random acts of kindness. yeah, so actually mindfulness, even though it's a bit, you would think weird, like, because we said before, yeah, but mindfulness is also about seeing the bad in life and being with it and being in the moment and breathing. Like, how can that make me now happy? But the truth is there's so much you can experience in this one moment if you have so many beautiful sensory experiences around you all the time, and you have nothing else than this moment in a way, like, because the mind always thinks about the future or the past, and it's not really here, right? So first you arrive in the moment, and there you can find happiness.
So, Brad, I'd love to sort of close this out with having you tell us another inspiring story of kindness from your book, something that you think is a good story to take away from all of this.
All right. I'll tell you about Gabriel, because I think his story fits really well into kindness being able to create some happiness. This is from when Gabriel was 6 years old, and his mom, Natasha, was tucking him into bed. And she said, Gabriel, you're doing great, and I'm happy, but November 3rd is a sad day for me, and I don't want you to be concerned if you see me sad. And the reason it's a sad day for her is because it was the day that he had been diagnosed with cancer. And he's fine and he was healthy at this point, but it always weighed heavily on her. And Gabriel said, Mom, why does it have to be a sad day? Why can't we turn it into a happy day? And she said, what do you mean? And he said, like Secret Santa Day. So here's the backstory on their family's Secret Santa tradition. So at Christmas, someone had dropped off presents for Gabriel and his sister. And this is while Gabriel was in treatment. And there was a card with it, and all the card said was from Secret Santa. And Natasha pinned this card on the refrigerator. And almost every night they talked about it, like how great it was that someone gave them these gifts, and they had no idea who it was. So finally, when the next Christmas came around, they decided we should become Secret Santas. And Gabriel and his mom and his grandma would go out and sneak onto the porches of people in their community that they thought could use a boost and leave presents for them with a card that said from Secret Santa. And that brought them so much joy that Gabriel wanted to try to make November 3rd similar. So Natasha made a short video. She was recording Gabriel, and Gabriel said, I want to turn a dark day into a day of light. So I'd like everyone to do something good. Like, just do anything good. And Natasha emailed this out to about a dozen friends and family. And one family member said, could you put this on a Facebook page? That way, if we do something, we could type what we did, and we'll all kind of be this club. So Gabriel goes crazy. Like, oh my goodness, it's on Facebook. Thousands of people are going to do it. And his mom's trying to like set his expectations. Like, we'll be lucky if a dozen people do it. Because a lot of people don't like to talk about their acts of kindness. And we just emailed friends and family. Well, of course, that's not what happened. They asked people, if you do an act of kindness, please give out a little card that talks about Gabriel's Day of Kindness and encouraging people to pay it forward with an act of kindness, and include the website address so people could respond to us if they want to. Mm-hmm. So they live in Boston. This thing rolls out on November 3rd. The first kind act comes from Wisconsin, then from Florida. Soon it's across the entire US. Then it goes to Armenia, France, Czech Republic, 56 countries. This 6-year-old started a global kindness movement.
That's awesome.
And his family got involved with it. So like they went to the hospital where he was treated and gave gifts to the other kids who were there and donuts to the doctors. They put together bags for people who were homeless. They put gift cards in there and food and toiletries. And they went to a restaurant and paid for another table's meal and watched as table after table after table paid for the next meal, until Gabriel's dad finally said, we got to go home. Like, we can't stay here all night. And they got home, and Gabriel said, this was great, Mom. Can we do it tomorrow? She's like, no. He's like, can we do it next year? She said, we could do it next year.
Yeah.
It became a yearly tradition. And when I asked Natasha, she said, that day is no longer a sad day for me. And sometimes it takes a kid, right? A kid who isn't accustomed to, this is the way things have to be, to say, why can't it be different? And I think all of us, like, we should look at the things in our lives that aren't the way we want and say, why can't it be different? And by the way, the last little bit to this story is that 7 families reached out to Natasha and said that they created their own days of kindness as a way to turn their child's diagnosis day into a happier day.
Wow, that's beautiful. So that's a really lovely way to end, although I know I said I would end there, but I'm actually going to end with this comment that Amelia Price has made to all of us, which is to thank you for suggesting the messages of love and thank yous, because she's been sending them this entire session, apparently. And she said the responses I've received back are heartwarming. Many thanks for suggesting to send unexpected warm fuzzies. Right? That's exactly what your intent was. Right? Happiness going back and forth. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to both of you. And I just, I would be remiss if I didn't say that, this feels like an incredibly timely and important conversation, because it feels like the thing that we have missed so much of is sort of recognizing kindness. And so I don't want to say that there hasn't been kindness. It feels like we live in a less kind world, but I think it's that we don't talk about the kindnesses as much. And so I am very glad that we spent the hour doing that. Thank you both. And thank you to our partners and to everybody who attended tonight.